Hey, what's up? It's Jesko from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. I've got a really special episode for you because I'm joined by Andy Shoemaker, a former client of mine who's been working out of the studio that we've worked on together for the past year, almost 2 years now. It's an attic studio. It's a tricky room. And I want to show you, with the help of Andy, what it means to treat this space, but more importantly, also what it means to now work out of this space. So first of all, Andy, thanks for joining me.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
First of all, I want to start with kind of introducing you, giving people an idea of what you do. Can you just tell me a bit about your daily hassle, your daily work? So you work out of a proper studio, but also the home studio. Can you just quickly talk about that? What kind of music you work on? What's your daily work?
So I think, like most audio professionals, whatever that means now, I guess, there's some hybrid elements of adapting to a whole bunch of different scenarios. So yeah, I do recording, mixing, and mastering. Those are my primary things, and so I have been working out of the same commercial space. I'm in Chicago, a place called Rax Tracks. Been there for 15 years. So
Wow.
been there a long time. Started there like right out of school. Then all my experience has been built up, like getting a chance to work on tons of different kinds of music. So like a bunch of gospel rock, more like indie rock, I suppose. Folk stuff, singer-songwriter stuff. Been doing a bunch of Latin music recently, kind of all over the map stylistically. So it covers a lot of ground. That's one of the things that I love about that spot is that I get to work on a lot of different styles of music and recording a bunch of different instruments. So for the hybrid element, I suppose, there's just been more and more of a need over the years to be able to have my own space, to be able to work on things for a bunch of reasons. The primary reasons that I look at is one, I've got a family, and studio hours are not exactly friendly for that.
Sure.
So I was just working too many nights, working too many long hours, and but like I wasn't going to make so dramatic of a change that I was going to shift that. I just needed to be able to adapt to it, and then also being able to work on projects that I wanted to work on, but maybe didn't have a full budget. Sure. So I've been able to do a number of things, and I've always had some sort of space at home to work, but the caliber of that has been varied over the years from
Sure.
a desk in the corner of a living room at one point, or like a really tiny, like bedroom at another point. And so there's always been a spot, but I wanted it to be more and more of a professional space to work in. And it's been able to give me the opportunity to, I can go downstairs and have dinner, and there's zero commute. And I've also been able to mix stuff for friends that the budget wouldn't accommodate.
Sure.
To be able to do it otherwise, but I can still make a living doing it at those numbers. So those were some of the primary goals of wanting to have the flexibility. So I float back and forth. I do all my recording out of the commercial space. I still do a lot of mixing and I'll do all my mastering at that space because that's where all the nice analog gear is.
Sure.
But for mixing, I split, certainly, like, editing and vocal tuning and things like that. I do a bunch of that here too, just to be able to make things a little bit more affordable for people.
Gotcha. Yeah. So obviously, so then you wanted to build out this space. Can we just take it back to the beginning? What did that space look like when you kind of first got it? This is in your house. You bought this house, I believe, a few years back. So
back in 2016, I think.
Gotcha. So what were we facing? What were you facing with this space? What made it so challenging, or what were kind of the key points that we had to deal with in order to convert this into your studio?
Yeah. So having a space to carve out as my own was like a primary objective when we were looking to get a place to buy and move into. And a couple categories I think that you have to address is, obviously, like, size and shape are part of the ideals, but the primary one for me was, at first, was can I like work with this space completely? Can I say, like, this is mine, like this isn't a shared space, this isn't going to be someplace where it's going to be too much overlap with my family, who also needs to live here. So we found this house, and it wasn't like the primary factor or whatever, but it had an upstairs half finished attic, and which means that I'm the only thing on this level. There's basically stairs, like a little entryway room, and then this room and nothing else. So that allowed me the flexibility to say I can treat this however I need to. I can have a little bit of separation. I can have people come over, and it won't feel like it's interfering with the day-to-day. The challenges of this particular room, because it's kind of like, do I work in a room like this, or do I work in the basement? And the basement would have required a whole different set of challenges, and it would have been a more complicated build out, and it would have been too much overlap with the other spaces in the house. So the big challenges in this one, and I think you've got some images that you can show.
Exactly. I'm going to be showing some images as we're doing this. Yeah.
I remember trying to even draw the space out for you. And it was really weird to draw the space, because there's a couple main components. The ceiling is what I would view the biggest one. And you can adjust if there's actually more complicating factors. But the ceiling is, you can kind of see it behind me. It's sloped here, and then there's an equal one here. So it's not super tall ceilings, and the overall volume of the room is lower by, I don't know, 20% or so, because of the ceiling not being square up to the top. So that's going to change some reflections. That's going to change options of where bass trapping and such could be put. The other thing is that the front of my room, you can't see it here because it's behind the screen, but there's a window here, and around the window, the way it's shaped going out like the roof, is that there was the whole front is a little bit narrower, and so it kind of does like this shape at the front. It's symmetrical, but it's got two weird shapes going on.
Right. Yeah. So when did you think it was even possible to get to where you are now back then? I mean, do you remember, like, what was the feeling when you were looking at this? Was it like, oh yeah, I can do this, or was there a doubt? Like, tell me about that a little bit.
I think there's like things that I learned going through the process that I certainly didn't know going on. I was like, all right, well, we're just gotta, I gotta do this and this and this. It's like I had done plenty of gear space type reading.
Sure.
And like, you know, like I'm sure most people watching this, they've got like forum information, and you've got this guy saying this thing and this person over here saying this thing. Like, no, like that's not how to read the graph. You're stupid because you do this. Why would you even consider this? And I was like,
Yeah,
I don't even know what some of these terms mean. I had an acoustics course in college, so I had some like basic stuff. I had some things about the math, like, but I'm like, I'm in over my head for sure to do things like in a professional manner. But I was like, I can at least get started building some panels. I can, you know, I can do that. That's not a super complicated thing. And so that's where I got started. Is I just went to it. As soon as I had the opportunity, I started building a number of panels. So
so that was kind of the first starting point for you. And I remember that when you got in touch with me, you'd already done some of that.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me what then triggered the kind of the desire to reach out and actually get kind of professional help in moving forward?
So the whole thing, I think the answer to several questions is going to be the same. And that is, it's just a steady improvement. It's like a steady tinkering with what's there. And I think that's in part, that's like the engineer way, right? Like you get, I feel like I'm always like, even when I'm recording, like, can I make it a little bit better? Can I make it a little bit better? Can I make this a little bit more accurate? Can I make it make the translation a little bit better? And because that's ultimately the thing, is finding a way to listen through the room, so to speak, to be able to get to the end result. So
that's what matters in the end, doesn't it? It's like, I mean,
right. Doesn't matter how it's here.
It's great if the room sounds great, but what matters is, can you reliably work, or do you trust what you're hearing? Can you intuitively make those changes and then go out and listen to it in your car or your hi-fi, whatever, and be like, oh yeah, there's that exact thing that I did in the studio.
And so my approach has been, from the beginning, like acoustics first and then gear. You know, I could have jumped into like, let me get some nice speakers, let me get some new converters, let me get some analog gear, whatever. And I eventually like started on that path, but I had already felt like I was making steps on the acoustics path first. So I was starting to find that as I was starting to like do more mixing from here, like getting more opportunities to work here on music, because a lot of the first stuff that I was doing was like, I was doing like some work for film that it involved like a lot of dialogue editing and cleanup and such, stuff that wasn't as precise with frequency balances and things like that. So as I was doing more music and then bringing it into the commercial space, I was doing to either finish or to do mastering or whatever, I was noticing certain parallels in some of the deficiencies, and they were similar issues in like low end, low mids. And so it's like, all right, well, I'm identifying some problems. Let me make the next step. And so it went through several rounds of that. And at some point I had found your stuff online. I don't remember exactly how and what, but I was on your email list when you were doing the beta version of your bass trap course.
Gotcha.
And so it was like, the requirements were, you've got to be able to build these like relatively soon. And I was like, okay, well, I'm planning on trying to make some adjustments here. Like, let me learn some stuff. Let me see if there's stuff that I could do better about the traps that I've built. Maybe I need to make more. Maybe I need to change something. And so I jumped in there as, gotcha. I think that was, I'm trying to remember. I think that this is like, I did it in stages. I think I did it in 4 stages, just to not like lose my mind building, because it just takes a lot of time to do that. So if you're ever in a position where you're sanding 30 bass traps, you will maybe want to not do that. So I started in smaller increments so that I could actually reach, finishing points along the way. So
I mean, I got to hand it to you though as well, just at this point, because you did a fantastic job at building everything. I mean, you sanded, you stained the panels, the wood rather. I mean, it looks fantastic. You built your own desk inspired by some popular, not so popular, well, not popular, but some very high-end designs out there. And it looks fantastic. And I can put some pictures in as well of those. So you did a really good job. Maybe just jumping forward then to our work together. So obviously there's kind of the process that we went through, first of all, figuring out with your listening position and your speakers where that needs to go, and then planning the treatment around that. And by the way, for anybody who's watching, this is the same process that is in my home studio treatment framework, which I'll put at the link in the description. You can download that for free. It's my 5 steps to treat a room and get it to translate. So it's that exact same process that we kind of went through, starting with positioning and placing your setup. Do you want to just talk about that real quick? I know you went really detailed on that. I love that because there's a lot to be gained by being accurate with that. Can you just talk to me a bit about what you experienced placing your setup, placing your speakers?
Yeah, I think the shortest version is that it doesn't seem like if someone just said like, well, maybe you should move your speakers, like that doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel like real advice in some way.
Just turn them upside down.
Not like that. But like it just feels like it doesn't feel like good marketing, right? Because
it's so inaccurate. It doesn't tell you anything. It's like the same as like trust your hearing, which I tend to say all the time, but it doesn't really help. You need to say, how do I actually do that? Right.
Right. And I feel like there's just so much there's so much marketing around audio gear and music making that's all about plugins, gear, speakers, all that stuff, that it's like, well, this is the thing. And so to hear like, we'll start by like, let's see if we're going to move your speakers. It's like, well, I don't know, like that's where they go. Like I already did the measurement thing, I did the 38% listening position or whatever. Like I already did that. I read the forums, so I think some of the things that were like really freeing was just like, all right, like, yeah, there's like truth to that stuff, but that doesn't mean it has to be like, you don't have to follow all those in order to have the best execution of this particular space. Like we're not talking about theoretical perfect build outs. We're adapting rooms that are what they are.
Exactly.
And so I had years ago, I had a kind of a revelation in another category where I would be like, oh, I don't know about that, by changing amplifiers on speakers. And I was always working on NS10s before we moved to ATCs at the commercial space that I was working out of. We were always on NS10s to mix, and we upgraded our amp, and I was like blown away by how much better they sounded. And I was kind of always like, okay, that's like what the hi-fi guys say. Like, it was just like, for whatever reason, it was something I didn't like believe in that much. I thought the differences were minor. And I think that I would have had a similar approach to like speaker position and all that. But when I started getting into adjusting and little details and then being able to like look at measurements and stuff to confirm some things, and seeing like, wow, when you get the triangle set and the angle's just right. Like the top end like goes from like, I should do it the other way because it's backwards. The top end kind of goes from here to like here. And I was like, that's amazing. And it's just the details of placement. So when I got started, I just took my time. I did the thing, put the speaker down in the corner, and I just put on some music and I just like sat and listened for a while, but like I didn't work too hard at it. Like I was doing some other things, and I'd scoot my position a little bit, and I'd try to not think about it too much and just ease into it and find like, okay, this is where my spot is going to be. And it wasn't even like that much different in dimension.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I don't know, maybe a foot difference, maybe less from where I had been sitting before. And there's not like a whole lot of options. It's not a large space, but still it was different enough. And when I started doing, like, I'm moving forward, moving back, moving further back, doing all this stuff, I was like, okay, there's a noticeable difference here. This spot is boomier. This spot is tighter. This spot is thinner. And okay, we're going to base this around this point.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big change, I think, also in my confidence too,
mm-hmm.
because
excellent.
We have a big like mental question mark of being able to trust the room. And I had already had some questions like, I don't know, like some stuff's not translating all the way. And so things like that were like, okay, I'm figuring out this process in a way that is beyond just like, well, let me mix and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, great. I mean, there's something systematic about it, right? So there's the fact that you learn about what works in your room, but you're also just training your ear in a way, becoming more confident about what's possible, where do the extremes lie.
Yeah.
Like worst case here and worst case there, sort of worst boominess, worst thinness, if you will, mm-hmm. and figure out what's in between and where do I want to lie in between those, right? And that gives you just experience and confidence about what's actually happening, and then you can just base your decisions off of that. And
just to jump in,
super valuable.
Please. That was a partially treated room already.
Yeah,
I had already put in, I don't know, like a dozen panels or something. And I've since added to that and changed some. I could feel that difference in what would what a lot of people would say, like, I'm done. Like, this is good. I did all the things. First reflection points, some corner traps, I did all the things. Where I was still feeling like I want to push further. And I then found quite a few areas where I was a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, but it's a sum of the parts situation. So
that's exactly right. I mean, I say that often, that acoustics is taking a lot of little steps in the right direction. Yeah. And in many ways, it's an iterative process where you keep improving things. You can take some big steps with certain aspects. Just initially finding your listening position on setting up your speakers. But even then, once you go through the treatment process, you might be refining your treatment. You might be refining your speaker placement. I think that's something that you've been doing all along up till now, since we kind of finished you and I. Maybe just like let's take things that step further. So obviously at that point, so you're set up. You've got the original treatment in the room that you built yourself. We then went through the planning of the treatment together for what you've got now. And by the way, for anybody watching, again, this is one of your room is one of the examples that is in my absorber placement hacks for odd rooms course. So for anybody who's dealing with an attic studio, your room is definitely a great example to go through and learn what's possible and what can be done. So we went through that, and then obviously the you had to put it all into place, build everything. Can you just talk to me a bit about the actual building aspect, the process of that? What did you find most challenging as part of that process of actually getting the panels done?
I think some of that, in terms of difficulty, some of that is just some of like the process of doing it. And finding the time, and like it just takes a long time. Now, to clarify, I had to match things that I had already put in. So if you do like the fully wrapped panels, those take a whole lot less time, or even the designs that you have in your bass trap course are a simpler build. But I was matching stuff that I already put together that were kind of just like to match my own aesthetic. So some of it's like, it's extra details of like all the corners are mitered, so there's like no visible edges, and it's like it's the stuff that like mattered to me, but it takes a bunch of extra time, but it doesn't change anything about the efficiency of the trap. It's just the aesthetics of it. So like I'm putting like I'm putting like trim on it and to cover the edges, and the stuff stretches behind it and staples in, and I also had like some really complicated things about attaching to the ceiling that I had to be able to do because I wanted to hide the hardware. And I've got angled ceilings, so like these big ones actually hinge down. They look like some sort of reverse Lambo doors that come down, and like it's over engineered, and it's not
to be underestimated how much work it actually is. Even if we're doing this with panels, it's a modular approach. There's a sort of a bit of a batch building assembly line thing to it. If we're working with panels, that is kind of different to when you do a fixed install, but that makes things easier, but it is still a lot of work. It's not necessarily extremely difficult, but it is a lot of just time consuming work that you need to put in. And I think isn't to be underestimated, right?
And so some of what I did also is I modified like the plan that you put in place. I modified. So for example, like instead of this being two, I think you had it as like two panels that are there. I just made it as one big one. Well, that presents like a whole bunch of different things. Like you don't get to just batch all your cuts. You can't just say like, well, I need 30 pieces that are this many centimeters long. It's like, well, I need 2 that are this long, and I need 4 that are this long, and I need like it just complicates that part. And like it's just like part of it was just aesthetic. So and I made it so that like it matches the angles and fits flush, and all that stuff that was like important to me, because like I wanted it. Part of what I wanted to feel was I wanted this space to be visually something that that if someone comes in here, they're not feeling like you're just doing this in your bedroom or a spare room or something. Like, no, this is a studio. Because I was kind of tired of like a certain amount of, there's like a lot of people that just kind of like throw up some speakers and they've got a laptop and a little interface and like, I've got a studio. And it's like, well, yes and no. We're talking about capabilities and effectiveness and quality. I wanted it to be such that this feels like a professional environment. And that's what I was after. So I took the extra time, the extra work beyond what some of the other situations would maybe need in order to make a space that looked nice, that felt nice. I'm like, I'm going to be if I'm going to spend a lot of time in here myself, I want it to feel like an inspiring place to work. And things like that. So I think some of the difficulty in preparing it is just going through the steps of doing the work. The actual like, building of panels is not, it's not super difficult.
No.
Especially if even if you're moderately handy, you can do something relatively simple that's going to get you the work, or the effectiveness. But I just wanted to take it further and make it look a little nicer. So
yeah, and you did an excellent job. So with that, so what did we reach the goal that you wanted to reach? What was the biggest surprise for you once you finished, or now working in the studio? Even what's the biggest kind of aha moment or the biggest aha experience for you now having the space, working out of the space?
Yeah, I think rather than like an aha moment, I think I would more just describe it as like a steady understanding and feeling of confidence.
Nice.
That has worked in. And like I remember looking at the designs and being like, wow, that feels like a really bold move. Like
okay.
these bass traps were like, okay, like put a huge air gap behind it. But I was thinking like, that's like a really bold thing. And I was like, I don't know, is that gonna like take up too much space and all this stuff? I was like, but you know what? I'm going for it. Accuracy is my primary concern. Then just finding like, okay, the low end is feeling better. Like there are fewer surprises when I move something to another room. If I'm mixing here, then I go to master at the other spot. Like I'm not like, oh, well, I gotta really sort out this low end thing. And I think part of that is just time spent. It's more experience. It's learning the space, but it's also the accuracy has improved. And I think some of the things that I remember hearing from the bass trap courses where you're explaining the difference between dead and dry. And that felt like, okay, that feels like the thing. That sure, understanding of that difference in terminology, because people use them interchangeably so often. And feeling like, okay, like, people like they'll like snap fingers, clap, like, wow, it's so dead in here or whatever. And it's just that they're not hearing the flutter echo and they think that they've solved something. And I've been there before. I've done the same thing in previous setups and thinking that like I got it. I was like, well, no, that's not the only thing. That's a good start. That helps with some things. But that's not actually like where some of the primary issues are, and that imbalance of reverb time. That was, I think that is ultimately the thing that got under control by the measurements. And kind of learning to say like the frequency balance is what it is, but like these are the other things that we need to pay attention to. These are where some of the differences are. And I think that addressing those in the design and the build is what's contributing to that confidence and contributing to that accuracy. And like, I'm hearing this better. I'm hearing this truer. I'm making better decisions because of it. And then like the revision notes become more issues of taste,
yes,
and direction than they are of corrective.
Yes.
That's like we got to do something about this bass, or this is feeling too muddy or whatever. It's like, I would prefer to hear it this way. And then then the process of fine tuning a mix just feels better, because it feels like a conversation and rather than fixing stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think that'd be how I describe the process overall, was just a steady increase in accuracy, and then learning a little bit about like what is actually changing in the physical space to improve that accuracy and help me with my decision making and all the rest.
Yeah, excellent. And I mean, at this point, it's probably worth looking at the frequency response that we ended up with. This is from probably a year and a half ago, so things have changed, but this is kind of the latest measurement that we've got. And there's still...
I've done some additional like tweaking, and so there's some dips in here that are less.
And I'd like you to just talk about that, because one of the things, I mean, my approach is very much kind of 80-20. Yeah. So we're not aiming for perfect. If you want to aim for perfect, you better have the budget for it. So we're aiming for workable. We're aiming for trust, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And one of the things in the low end that still appears is what we can see in these frequency response measurements, and that is very often that there's still variation going on. In this case, it's probably still some form of speaker boundary interference, I would assume. The point being, this is something that is still in the room. How do you deal with that? What's your experience with working with the bass as it is?
You know what, I'm trying to think too. I think that those measurements were taken right after I switched my desk.
Right.
So, because I had like a big like desk.
Okay.
Before I put in this one, which has it's very minimal. It's only it's only this deep, to minimize the like mid-range reflections and such off the surface. I did some tests a while back where I just put big packing blankets on top and redid it, and I was like, wow, like the stuff going on in the mid-range, it like reduced so much. It's like, all right, well, I've been wanting to do this for a while. I guess it's time to build a desk.
I guess it's time to build a tiny desk.
It was time. So I'm pretty sure these numbers reflect that, but they don't reflect some of the final positioning of speakers. But it's close.
But again, coming back to this question about the low end, how do you deal with this dip? How do you deal with that variation that is still in there? Is this something that bothers you at all? Maybe let's just start with that.
Not so much, no. I think that as I've made the frequency graphs are always scarier than they really are. Like when you look at them, it's like, whoa, how can I ever achieve any accuracy out of this? But the reality is, like, stuff like that exists everywhere. And I don't know, I'd love to see what the curves of some of the new super high end, fully built out mastering rooms are, out of curiosity. But as you know, I've done the measurements at the commercial spot that I'm working on, and you see, like, there's just acoustic phenomena about the way low end works, and it's just kind of always there. It's just, how is it there? Minimizing the effects of what the room is doing to it, but like, it's always gonna be there. And so you just, when you can get it to a spot where I think it's translating, you don't have to think about it so much. And so I've fiddled with like sub levels to it just brings up or down. The shape stays the same, but it just, how much or how little, and finding where does music sound good to me? Like, where does my preference of overall tone sit? And then just learning to stop thinking about it. And I think that it took all these iterations and changes to get to that spot where I could just stop thinking about it. And still always in the quest of like, well, can I make a little bit better? Can I make it a little bit better? But it's it doesn't feel like the primary thing. I kind of think where I'm at the spot now where I can stop feeling like looking around like, should I build something different? Should I add something? Should I should I put this on the ceiling? Should I do this to the other wall? Like, and might I still? Maybe, I've thought like, maybe I'll add some diffusion to the front. Maybe, I don't know. I'll see. But it becomes that like personal preference thing. Do I like this better, rather than I need to sort this out in order to be able to address the low end or whatever it might be. I feel like it's to the point where I can just sit down and work and not have to.
Which is exactly what we want. Yeah. So talking about tonality and kind of getting that, finding that taste, or rather maybe also just adjusting the system to taste. I'm a proponent of corrective EQ in home studios because it helps, especially if the frequency response remains fairly unbalanced, even with a lot of treatment, because it's down to a lot of the room size and geometry that might be tricky to change. And so you're definitely a user of SonarWorks. You're of corrective EQ. You've been experimenting with that.
Yeah, a little bit.
Can you tell me a bit about what that's like? How much is it actually how much is SonarWorks still doing on its own? How do you deal with it? How do you tailor the correction to your taste?
So I'll jump back a little bit, and because it's been something that's been on my radar for a little bit. It's been around for I don't know how many years, and I've wondered about it, and everyone's got their opinion about it. And I had seen it used in like a moderately treated production space, basically like someone's bedroom with a couple panels on the wall. And I was like, wow, that's dramatic. But the difference between it was like incredible. It was like switching speakers. It was like, like anybody would have heard a difference. It's not like I think I like that one a little better. It was definite difference. It was
drastic. Yeah.
Drastic. And so I tried it. I did like the you get a month demo or something a couple years ago, and I set it up, tried it, and I remember feeling like the accuracy was more. There was a few things different about my system. I don't think I had my ATCs yet. So I had NS10s and a sub, just a little one. And I did feel like it helped. It made the process of mixing that record easier. But it still kind of went back to that idea of sorting out the acoustics first. And to me, it just felt like I know enough about it to know that that's not actually solving all the problems. And I wanted to have less DSP happening. So I didn't use it for a couple of years after that, and just steadily made improvements to the physical setup. And that was always my approach, is get that as close as you can, and then clean up some extras with some DSP.
That's exactly the right approach. Yeah.
And so my goal was to kind of have it do as little as possible. And so I don't know, maybe in the last 6 months or so, I bought it for myself, and I started using it. And so it always feels like, looking at these graphs compared to like the room EQ where you can like zoom and change everything, always feels a little restrictive, but it's doing like a couple dB moves. It still has that, the biggest change is, looks like it's about like 150. But in actual use, from like the official measurement versus what I have going on for the like the actual in use curve that I have in my session, is different. So basically what I did is I trim off the top and the bottom, so I actually don't have it affecting the subs or the very top. I figured I would just rather let my speakers do those things. And because it was trying to put some boosts into the subs to flatten it out, I figured that was going to be probably working against some of the decay times in, I don't need 40 hertz hanging around extra. So I just bracketed that in. So it's not ever actually even touching some stuff. And I usually have been using the dry wet curve, like to kind of keeps defaulting. I've been using it like 75% or less sometimes. So the actual movements are not super dramatic. And so in use, when I go back and forth between it, I'm hearing, the thing that I notice is like a little bit of extra clarity in the mid-range. And I think in part that's because it's just boosting them up a little bit. It's boosting like a little bit from like 1K and above. It's giving a little bit of an extra boost. So you'd expect that. So it doesn't feel like, if I'm working with it or without it, it doesn't feel like dramatic surprises. And when I switch between speakers, I don't feel like I need to keep turning it on and off. I just usually leave it. And even when I have it calibrated to my ATCs, if I switch to my NS10s, or I've got a little boom box down there that's hidden away. If I switch, I usually just leave it and don't feel like I have to worry about it, because it's not doing something so dramatic that it's gonna throw off my perception in my, my different perspective speakers or something.
Yeah, great. I think that's perfect. I think it's exactly what you want to do, right? You want to minimize the use of DSP, of corrective EQ. It does help. I think it's a tool is worth having in the toolbox, no matter how much treatment you've done. As you're starting out with very little treatment, the EQ is going to try and do a lot, and you got to ask yourself whether you want to have it do that much. There are options, obviously, in SonarWorks specifically to reduce its impact. Like you said, the bracketing. I think there's also the like cut only or boost only 6 dB, boost only 3 dB or something.
You can have like a little bit of an EQ that you can manually do. So you can say, like, I'm trying to do this much dB here, I'm going to actually make it so it only does this. Like, it's not super fine tuning, but you can adjust.
Exactly. And so you want to kind of mess with that a little bit to figure out how little you can get away with, really, right? Because you want to reduce it to the extent that you can. It still gives you the improvement that you want, just about. And then as you go through treating your room, the more you do, the more you focus on all the other aspects, the less corrective EQ has to do, and then ultimately, hopefully, you can get rid of it. But sometimes that's just not possible, and just that little touch up with EQ is going to be worth it.
Yeah, I feel like I don't like when people market things as like a quick fix, and so I think people sometimes perceive it to be a different tool than it is, and the thing that always got me about it was like, I know it's not going to do anything for the time domain. And so I want to have that solved, so to speak, before
the only way to do that is with treatment.
Right. There's just no getting around it. So now I feel like, if I have it on, if I have it off, it's not going to be like a make or break difference for how I'm working. It's like a perspective thing. Although some of the modeled curves are kind of interesting to have access to. Like, you can set it to be like oratones or something like that. And that's kind of a cool approach to say, like, all right, I'm just going to listen like this for a while and see how is it translating. And I think those stuff like that feels like a really useful set of tools. So
excellent. And you use that in combination with the boombox that you just mentioned.
Yeah, after I was like messing with those tools in SonarWorks, I was like, man, I'm gonna replug my boombox in, and so I sometimes I'm just using the real thing instead of SonarWorks for some of that, just because I can just switch it on my monitor controller. But yeah, it's a tool, and
Sure,
I
exactly.
find it to have some use. But on one hand, it's like you're hoping it's like going to do something amazing. But on the other hand, I think I was actually more glad that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Because I felt like, okay, good. Like I'm
awesome. The software tells me I did everything right.
Right. I don't feel like suddenly I need to go back and remix a bunch of stuff because of like, well, the frequency chart says this. And so I could, it goes back to that confidence. And I think that feels, if you're watching this video, you probably are looking for that because you don't feel confidence yet. And that's something that it's huge. I feel like I can work in all the different rooms that I work in, that I mix and master out of. I can do that confidently. And that's because of the design and the treatment and the tweaking and the focus and of positioning and all of that.
Yeah, getting all those little steps right.
Yeah.
I think, Andy, thanks so much. I think that's a good point as any to wrap up. One final question I have for you. What would you say, what's the thing that you like the most about the room? And what is the thing you dislike the most about the room?
I think I'd probably answer this in a way that maybe is different than people might think. I think the thing that I like the most is that it exists. And it's here for me. I can take care of things that I need to do. It allows me to do what I need to do. And it can just kind of go away in my mind a little bit. I can just go work. The things that I like the least about it, I don't know, like if I had the choice, I would make it a more normal shape. It would be nice to have a little more headroom. Like if I'm walking through, there's been a couple times I've had some people over that are like way taller than me. Like, hey, I'm sorry. Physically I would change that, but I think in some ways the thing that I like the least about it is just the way like access to a space so close can prey on like a productivity mentality that says like you got to do. And so while it makes it easier to be able to separate things about my work and home life, it also makes some things more difficult. Cause it's like, well, just go upstairs and work. If I've got to make a deadline or something, but so I don't know, that's maybe a different answer than you're expecting, but
no, it's I think a great answer. It brings me back to the fact that acoustics isn't about the room sound, it's about what it can do for you as you're using the space, right? And the advantages aren't in the what does the room sound like, but how does it affect your work. And the disadvantages, especially with the home studio, are just often very practical, like, damn, it's a small room, and you just kind of got to deal with that. But so I think you're spot on with that. Andy, let's leave it at that. I think we covered a whole range of really great points, and gave us a really good insight, a great insight into what it's like to work in a space like yours and kind of the challenges you're facing, but also what you can do with it, how far you can actually take things. Because I think you did a really, really good job, and you took things really, really far, and so you're reaping the benefits, So thanks again for joining me. For everybody watching, the steps that I went through with Andy in treating his room, you can find in my home studio treatment framework, like I mentioned before, at the link in the description. And as I mentioned as well, this room, if you are in an attic studio and you're wondering what we actually did for the treatment, this is one of the main examples in my absorber placement hacks for odd rooms course, which you can find when you sign up to my email list. So just make sure you download that home studio treatment a framework and sign up to my email list, and then you'll be informed to when I open up the course again. But with that, Andy, again, thanks so much, and see you soon.
Sounds good. Have a good one, Jessica.